Hi everyone, this is Views and Faceting with linked data. I wanted to briefly, before we get going, I didn't feel right about how I was talking about constraining for navigation and slices and cutting. So I was like, I better have a better description of this. So let me make sure I'm getting it right. Slicing, I found out I was saying it wrong. So this is like my mental model was wrong on this one. So I looked it up and was like, oh, slightly different. So maybe what I can do is plop open my old version of this presentation, interaction. We had semantic zooming, we had constrained navigation, we had a bunch of other things. All right. So, constrained navigation. If it was something I didn't even think about that before. I knew it was like you pin down some things. So let's imagine you have a bunch of like the Gapminder visualization, we're showing the life expectancy and the income. What if I choose a couple countries and I say those are going to stay where they are when I'm navigating? So no matter what happens when I'm zooming, those will always stay there. I can constrain those, or those are the ones that I need to make sure I track. Everything else can fade in and fade out, but the ones I'm tracking are those three things I've selected. And that would be a constrained navigation. So no matter what I'm doing with it, I can constrain some of the items that are being visible. So when I do navigate, those things either move at a minimal amount or are highly noticeable so that you don't accidentally lose track of them. That would be a constrained navigation. Slicing and cutting, on the other hand, this is not a great example of it. Slicing is normally, what if I kept all the attributes that I'm looking for at a particular time? So if I wanted to have highly active parts of the brain. So I have a brain scan, like a PET scan of the brain, and I want to only show the parts of the brain that are highly active at any given time. While I'm looking at a slice of the brain, the only thing I'm going to show are those parts that are highly active. I can also do a cut at the same time, but let's imagine I draw the entire brain, but everything else is transparent essentially. And the parts of the brain, like let's say the amygdala and a couple other parts of the brain, are highly active at a time. You would only show that. It would slice away everything else that is not the highly active part. Slicing suggests that you're actually making like a horizontal slice, but really it's actually selectively choosing or selectively showing some part of your data, by some attribute. So the stuff that's highly active, the things that are named after this, the parts of the brain labeled this, the parts of the brain in this particular location technically would also count, but that's not really a great attribute. Things like if I'm looking at an airplane wing, it might be the parts of the wing that have a temperature above a certain point, or have a certain amount of air flowing over beyond a certain point. A cut is normally you are removing the part of the scene that is between you, the camera, or you essentially, and the parts of the scene that you want. So it's a horizontal slice across whatever scene. So normally a three-dimensional scene. That would normally be a cut. Okay, so cut allows you to expose things inside, and a slice is I'm choosing parts of the data, attributes of the data by myself. Like choosing attributes that I'm seeing or paying attention to. Okay. That being said, let's actually get to what I was going to look at today, which is views, facets, and linked data. So it turns out we're also going to see interactivity. We're going to see, if you watch the video, and I highly recommend it, although it's long, you're going to see the very first interactive data visualization by John Tukey. I want to say Edward Tufte, but no, by John Tukey. So let's look at views and faceting. So we were talking about manipulation. This time we're going to look at different aspects or different views of the data. You can imagine looking at, I don't know if it's considered, some people get upset by this particular story, fable idea. The idea of the blind men and the elephant. I think it's originally from India, I'm not sure. The idea is that if you had people that do not have a sense of sight, and they're seeing an elephant for the first time, or experiencing an elephant for the first time, the one at the front feels the nose and says, "Oh my gosh, it's a snake!" drops the trunk. The other one feels like an ear, says that this elephant is a tree. The other one feels a tail and thinks it's, you know, a broom or a brush or something along those lines. Like that, every single person has only a small aspect of the data. You're only seeing part of the scene, part of what you're investigating. That's why we have multiple facets. That's why we need to worry about different perspectives of the data, because no matter who you are, you're only seeing some small part of an entire scene. Most things are not necessarily visible in one go, or not perceivable or comprehensible in one go. So you need to see it from multiple different vantage points, multiple different viewpoints. That's what faceting is all about. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. We can either juxtapose it, put two side by side. We can partition a data set so that, you know, put an arbitrary line and separate those things so you visually sort of break it apart. Or you can superimpose, which is I'm going to put two visualizations right on top of each other and see both at the same time. So a facet is one side of something many-sided, especially a cut gem. I like sort of that view of it. If you're looking at a diamond, depending on what part of the diamond you're looking through, it changes how you see things. It gives you a different perspective. In a visualization, you're split your visualization into multiple views, or separate it into layers. So you can overlay layers, but you can also have two different views at the same time. This is also why when we're doing things like we're talking about the data and the visualization are different. How you represent data can be radically different. A whole bunch of different ways of representing the same data. And a facet allows you to see different aspects of the data at the same time. When we talk about brushing and linking, we'll see it again, but we'll hook up these different layers. So this is yet another way of doing complexity reduction. It is a filter or a filtering or aggregation of the data, but not for all cases. I might filter and aggregate it in one place and do a different filter or aggregation on another visualization. And we're relying on vision. The point of this is you rely on vision rather than longer term memory to compare multiple things. An example is probably going to work better, but so we can partition things into two side-by-side views, or we can superimpose them. So one's a juxtaposed, the other one is a layering. If I use this multiple views points side of things, so here is one view of the data, here's a different view of the data. They're looking at the same data set, but maybe two different attributes. Why would I want to do that? Well, first of all, it's easy to compare. And you don't have to worry about having to do a change of view. You're not changing from this to this over time. You don't have to rely on working memory to keep track of what happened between the two. Side-by-side comparisons are relatively effective. Not only that, but with side-by-side compare, if I have two completely different things, they don't have to be on the same axis. You just have to know how the two different data sets relate to each other, but they could have the same x-axis, let's say, and radically different y-axes, and that you could still understand what's going on. The disadvantage, however, is, of course, it takes up space. When we look at small multiples, we've seen that, where we would have this entire grid of all the different ways of representing that same data set. Every single one of them takes up a certain amount of space. Okay, the other thing you could do, well, the change view, like a Gapminder would be a change view, right? I press play and I see things change over time. But if I forget what happened in 1966, I gotta go right back to 1966 and look at what the time is. Right. Sometimes that's easy to do. Sometimes it's very time intensive to go back. And you'll have to keep it in your head what happens. So these little dips that you end up seeing in Gapminder, maybe you didn't notice the dip. Well, then I need to have another approach. So this could be, and here's a different time. And what we might want to do with a juxtaposition is we could have what the countries look like, this is all the African countries, and this is all the Americas, the North and South American countries. The two different sets of countries. So African nations, this is the Americas. in 2015, and I can do a side-by-side comparison to see who has a greater income per year. The Americas seems pretty substantially higher, and the life expectancy, which is higher. It's harder. Notice it's harder to measure. It is higher for North Americas, but it's not radically higher. But it is higher. Here's 60. Here's 60. But notice it's not doing a vertical scan because they're stacked on top of each other. Becomes harder. If the axes are aligned, it's a lot easier. Okay, small multiples. I can also throw another one. Let's throw in what set of countries was this? This the Europe and no, it's just European countries, including Russia. So in yellow, right? And I can show all the different perspectives of things. That's just me expanding this juxtaposition idea to a whole bunch of different images. Or the other approach, I can superimpose layer. This doesn't scale as much as the small multiples. Small multiples, I can just have a grid of like 50 of these things. Juxtaposing is I have one view of the data, another view of the data. I put them on top of each other so I can compare. So it might be, these are North American countries. You could also consider them categorical coloring of these two things. And you can also consider it a layer, like Google Maps does a layer on top of it. So the bike path layers, and then you have the actual map underneath it, or the stores as a layer, and the stuff underneath it. It can get really messy. That layering effect is actually hard to keep straight for people, especially if you layer a bunch of stuff. At a certain point in time, that layering effect doesn't take, you don't really even notice it properly. So I could superimpose layers. This would be a superimposed layer, right? I show both at the same time. These layers can be static or dynamic. You might be limited number of distinguishable, but you can distinguish them, but you cannot distinguish like 5 layers. You have to put an upper limit on it. You've actually seen this, at least most of you have. Actually, almost every one of you have. Every one of your phones is doing this. It's not a visualization, but it's doing that. When you pull down the top, is it called a drawer on an iPhone? I don't know what it's called for the iPhone. The shade. Then that's one layer. You have the layer where all your apps are, and then you have a background layer, which is your background. You're clearly showing these different layers, and just that little bit of animation that you get conveys where are things, what the order of things are, what's on top of the other thing. They're all visual effects just because we're used to dealing with layers of things. Lenses, on the other hand, they're really kind of cool. It's essentially a layer that you put on top of your normal map, but the layer that you put there sees things that the other parts of the visualization don't. So imagine a magic lens or magic window into your data. So you would have your normal map, and then you'd put this magic lens on top of it that only shows the bike path in this one little square on top of your map. So here would be, I can do a bunch of layers. I could show all of these different parts of the human body, one after the other, as a layer. By the way, this would be a slice. If you wanted to go to the earlier example, a series of slices for a skeleton. Right here is your various layers on an iPhone. Right, we have the shade, which is a different layer. Notice it's making the background opaque to give you convey that sort of depth. And I still think it's the best article title ever: Collaborative Coupling Over Tabletop Displays. It sounds so wrong. Anyways, they were looking at a tabletop display. This is what a tabletop display looks like. This is what my supervisor looks like. This is the guy that helped mentor me during my master's degree. Anyways, they're working on a tabletop display, and they're trying to get people to do a collaborative task about, I think, finding buses. And so they'd have these little rectangular regions on the tabletop display where they could put it over top of a map, and it would show you bus routes in that area. You don't want to show bus routes everywhere. It's too much information. But a little tiny window with a lot of details, details on demand, allows you to make sense of the region. So when I need to know about buses in this region over here, I move the lens on top of it. I could have a lens for bike paths. I could have a lens for buses. If I put the lens for the buses and the bike path at the same time, I get bike paths and buses at the same time. it's a visual metaphor that really works. It's really intuitive for a lot of people, that I can just push this lens on top of things and I get more information, but each lens is specific for the kind of information it gives. So, by the way, the methods can be combined. So I can superimpose my layers, and so this is gapminder over time, and I can just do that twice, right? I could have one side by side for 1884, one for 2012, and I can side by side comparison both of these things. But I could also do a juxtaposition. I can also do a superimposed layer for the different countries in the world. Like here is the Asian countries and Asia and Australia and Oceania, I guess. Here are the European countries. Here are the blue ones are the African countries. And so maybe I only show Oceania and Asia and the African countries, right? In both. So I have layers here, and on top of that I have side by side a juxtaposition between two different dates. We also can do other things. So a multiform is essentially the same data with different encoding methods. So I can do the same graph or chart with a line graph or bar chart, let's say, and a scatter plot. It can be the same data, just a different visual representation. We can all, and I don't see that every once in a while it comes up and you go, oh, there's a multiform, okay, but one doesn't automatically spring to mind. You can imagine showing stock market prices in one and the same stocks in another. So stock market prices as a line graph, and the other one is showing percentage sales of stock prices in a bar chart or something like that. Focus plus context is what we're going to be talking about. Overview plus context. Focus and context, I guess you could say. So we can either do overview plus detail. I love that one. That's one of my personal favorite. We also have things like fisheye lenses, where you show the normal image, but they have a lens on top of that distorts everything. So you have this zoomed in, like a magnifying glass, zoomed in view of your data, and everything else is really, really tiny and small. So you get the context, but you get a region of highly visible, highly readable details. Focus plus context would be something like, I think Google used to do this. World of Warcraft does this, or not World of Warcraft, StarCraft, and a lot of these other not massive multiplayer online games. What are they called? Real-time strategy games, right? Where you have a overview of your map at the bottom with the fog of war on it, and then you have the details of what you're looking at the time. The details would be what the battle that's currently going on that you're seeing on your screen, and the overview is that little tiny world map on the corner where you can jump around in. So that's overview plus detail. You can also do a multiform overview plus detail. So I select a subset of my data here, like a little part of my data up here, but I have a different visualization down here. So maybe I'm looking at the years 1992. I'm selecting the years 1992 to 2008. And down here I have a pie chart, which I shouldn't do, but still, I have a pie chart for those years. That's a multiform overview plus detail. Why? Because quite frankly, if you have a really large complex data, I need to know where I'm looking, what the year range is. And just saying the year range does not really stick with me as well as me seeing how it pops out. I need to see fine level details, but I also want to get that overview. I want to see how it fits into the larger scheme of things. Like this. So we'll also look at brushing and zooming in a second as well, because this is related to brushing and zooming. So let's have a quick look at this. Hopefully it still works. And maybe we can look at XE trade as well, because that does a really nice view of this. Okay. So here we go. Now, notice what I get here. I clearly know the general trend in the data, how it's going up, but I'm choosing a snippet of the data, and although I could say October 2012, right, 2011, that's not good. if I looked at this quickly, I'm not going to see this 2011, 2012, or it's going to be harder for me. With seeing it, what part of the data I'm looking at and seeing it up there, it pops. I clearly know that this is connected to this. That interactivity is telling me something that I didn't know before. I get it immediately as a result. Notice also that I am brushing down here. This is the act of selecting an area, brushing it. And then that is linked to this other view up here. If I have two views, brushing and linking, which is a very common term that you'll hear me say a bunch of times, brushing and linking is I brush or select something down here, and the same or corresponding data in the other view is selected or filtered. So I'm filtering and navigating this up here based off of the visualization down below. Well, let's look at XE-Trade. XE-Trade. Let's see, Canadian American currency, I guess. That's not euros. Let's do Canadian dollars. And there we go. We'll change $1. Let's see if I have the. There we go. So that's a low fidelity one. So let's have a look at a better one. Looky here. Brushing and linking. I can see what the higher fidelity zoom in here. I can get over an individual date, let's say, but I'm seeing how it fits into the general trend over here. Because if you didn't know, if I'm looking at stock market prices, the price is always effectively going up, but you'll see these huge, when you look at stock prices, you'll see, oh my God, the thing dropped amazingly, this extreme amount. But then when you take a step back and you look at it, you go, actually, it didn't drop that much. Right? This is a huge run up for the US dollar to the Canadian dollar. This is what year? March 2020. All right. And then it goes back down again, down over here. So the big takeaway though is by linking what I select, what I'm choosing, what I selected, what I highlighted, what I clipped in terms of what in one of the visualizations, and it automatically reflecting in the other visualizations, one or more other visualizations, I clearly see the linking between the two. That's the big takeaway. So multiple views and they're linked together gives me something very important, something very powerful. It tells me the connection without having to draw lines and all this other kind of stuff. The linking, highlighting gives me some power. So I can look at the scatter plot matrix and have a look at this one, right? You can choose some subset of the data here, and every single other one of these scatter plots, the corresponding data is highlighted in the other scatter plots. That's why we do brushing and linking, because it tells you stories that you can't tell otherwise. Okay. And if you want to see brushing and linking in another case, this would be refugee scholars in the United States. I found this when I was teaching in Boston, just because it's a very depressing. I think it actually comes from it comes from Northeastern, but it's using brushing and linking, showing where refugees and scholarships in the United States were coming from over the years, and that the xenophobia that was going on in the United States at the time was not necessarily a new trend, but at the same time was perhaps a bit more exacerbated right about now. And there was a ministers and professors immigration policy that was used for a while, then suddenly dropped off after 1941. John Tukey, though, we're going to look at brushing and linking because actually you'll see this in one of his, because he actually develops it. He develops a ton of these things. This is not the mother of all demos, which is another demo around the same time period, but it's pretty big. John Tukey was one of the big statisticians in the world for a good long while. He's also one of the statisticians when other people were saying, just crunch some numbers, right? You have a bunch of data, crunch out some statistics, figure out what your statistical significance on your data is. And he was constantly pushing back at the community, statisticians community. He's constantly pushing back on people to say, no, play with the damn data first. Don't just start crunching numbers. You don't know if your data's clean. You don't know what it looks like. You don't know if the test you're applying is appropriate. You need to look at and have a sense of the data before you analyze it. This is what we're actually doing in our course as well. Just want to be very clear that it's intentional, and it comes from John Tukey. The Tukey test also comes from Tukey and about 50,000 other things. He also has an accent he's also from Massachusetts with a very strong accent, so I find it funny listening to him. Anyways, he's first to use the term software. He's the first person to use the term bit. One of the first people to use the term bit when talking about software. He made one of the first interactive visualization. He was one of the biggest people for charts and graphs, and he completely changed how we look at data and how we think about analyzing data versus just crunching a bunch of numbers, despite the fact that his statistical tests that he's invented over the years help you crunch those numbers. He was very big on the fact that you should not just crunch numbers, you should understand what the data is telling you. You could argue he's the father of interactive visualizations. He also developed brushing and linking with highlighting. Jeez, he did everything. So, this is from 1973. That's John Tukey there. There is no key, there's no mouse, it's just dials and keys, and it's a 3D plot. But this is 1973. I want you to have a look at this thing. The key parts are from 2 minutes to 7 minutes approximately, and at 22 minutes and 25 seconds to 25 minutes. But have a look at some of the style. There's some very funny outfits in this video. And it's boring as hell, just letting you know. Like, if you try and watch all 30 minutes, you're gonna be bored because it's extremely dry. But if you want, go for it. The point is that it's, despite any amount of monotone in his voice, it is revolutionary what this system was doing, because it allows you to explore data, 3D data, no less. One of his best quotes here is, "The greatest value of a picture is when it forces us to notice what we never expected to see." That is what we're looking at. That's why we do visualization. Because if you could just have the computer crank out the number and tell you the answer, we wouldn't need any of this stuff. Sometimes it can tell you things you wouldn't know. But a lot of it is the exploration tells you what the data says, not your intuition, not what your initial gut reaction was. Okay, so as an in-class exercise, I want you to look at, this is Worcester Polytechnical Institute, the WPI. It's an Intro-to-vis class that they were doing. This was a final project for a bunch of students, which is shocking. The MBTA, the Massachusetts MB Bus and Transit Authority, Massachusetts Bus and Transit Authority, called the T, kept all the data. They put trackers in all their subway cars, the T cars. They put trackers on all the buses, but the T is a special thing. And they have, every time you go through one of the turnstiles, you have to swipe. So they actually know who goes into a turnstile. They also know when people leave a turnstile because it opens. They don't know who goes in where and who comes out where, but they know where people are, what stops people are going to, what people are arriving in at, and what stops people are leaving from. So they know the traffic. They also know this is the various T trains. So like this orange line train right here might be here, and it's going, and you can watch it over time traveling along here. You can actually just press play, or I think you move it along here, and you'll see the train go along the path. So this is one. The red line is a bus path, or is a MBTA train line. There's a blue line. There's the orange line. Those are the three main lines. There's also a green line, but that's not in this tracking. Green line is just a whole other thing. It's light rail. It's bad. Anyways, so they have all of this visualization, all this information. What I would like you to do is go to mbta-vis, github.io. Hopefully it's still working. And I want you to find out what design principles are used, what parts of the Schneiderman mantra are included: overview, zoom, and filter, details on demand. May not all be all of these things, by the way. What one is your favorite viz and why? How do you think this whole thing could be improved? And then throw this into the Lecture 12 Google Drive. But I want to make sure it's up and running. So, okay. I want to just do the technology recap after this. So, try that out. I'm going to double check that the MBTA Viz GitHub IO website's still working, but it's been working every other term since I've checked it. What have we been doing so far? Well, I just like to recap some little things here. If I have the same data, do I need, so the exact same data, same attributes, and I encode it the same way, well, I don't need to do anything, right? The same, if I have the exact same data and the exact same encoding, well, I just have the thing twice. Who cares? Get rid of one. If I have the same data, the data is shared, it's all the same data, and the encoding, how it's represented, is different, then I have multiform. Okay. If I'm only looking at a subset of the data, but the same attributes, I get overview plus detail. If I'm looking at a subset of the data, the full data, and a subset of the data, plus I have different encodings, I get multiform plus overview and detail. So it might be this set of data, and here, so this would be the XE trade visualization. Here would be something like I'm showing these particular years for stocks, and this is a pie chart of those same stocks. And if I have different, if I have none of the shared data, so the data is completely different, items are completely different, but the encodings are the same, I get this small multiples. I get, I'm looking at, or completely different attributes. The data sets are not aligned at all. I'll get small multiples. So this might be miles per gallon and fuel efficiency, miles per gallon is fuel efficiency, miles per gallon and speed, and this might be years on the road and something else, right? They're showing different attributes of the same data set, and I could layer them if I wanted to, but they're not the same. They're not the same. It's the same way of encoding it, but the data sets are different, are completely separate from each other. And if there's nothing in common and the encodings are different, there's no linkage at all between them. These are the different ways I can link my data together. They have to have something in common. Either the encoding has to be the same, or the data that I'm looking at has to have some similarities. And so these are the different ways. So we talked about all of these various things. We can also, shared navigation is something we didn't look at, as in when I move from one of these visualizations, it moves the other visualization. These are ways I can link stuff. Whether I have all subset or none of the data set in common. And when I link, do I highlight in the other windows as well? So just to recap, here is what a highlight would look like if I'm selecting all these dots here. I did an outline around like that. That's it being highlighted. This is me brushing. The act of selecting that set is called a brushing. Right? If I'm painting something, I change the color. It's called brushing. And here's the highlight. So brush, highlight. Brushing, linking, and highlighting gives me this. So I select the data, brushing it. It shows me the highlight, and then it shows me the highlight in the other view. And that's the linking. And that tells me something very important about my data set. You'll see that in the MBTA visualization. Okay. I don't know how many more slides I have. Oh, I'm going to do one more. I don't want to do glyphs yet. I'm going to cover over partition views, and actually let's take a little break now, because I want to make sure the kids are okay right now. They're downstairs. And then afterwards, when I come back next time, we're going to look at partition views, and we have another in-class exercise. All right. Thanks, everyone.